Good afternoon. This is Catherine Spivey, co-chair of the Plain Language Action and Information Network, speaking here with DigitalGov University. And our topic today is toolkits. So I was thinking about toolkits because it came out at one of the conferences last year, at one of the conference presentations. And Kat and I were sort of scribbling notes to one another saying, toolkit, toolkit, and several exclamation marks. And am I muted? Okay, so I'm getting some very interesting effects right here on the screen, not entirely sure. And what I wanted to do was think about, with the new plainlanguage.gov website, what can we do to really get maybe a toolkit that people can find useful. And I have a couple of things that I'll be sharing with you as we, discuss this and brainstorm. And you'll be sending your questions through the chat function, I think, Janelle? Yes, the chat function. And I'll answer those at the end. Or, we'll see how far we get, and then we'll see if there are any questions and how that can go. So the first thing I wanted to share with you is just an example of an online toolkit that I found on the internet, and it is called Protecting Your Public Report, a Hands-On Guide. And that's from the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, from Department of Health and Human Services. And seriously, I just Googled toolkit to see what came up, and this is one of the things that came up. So this is, and I'm just reading along, this toolkit is designed to help communities increase awareness and use of their public reports by consumers and other important audiences. So these are suggested approaches and template materials, both in traditional and online avenues. So it's a couple of years old. This page is a couple of years old, it looks like. And these are the resources, the strategic considerations, overall communication plan template, health observances calendar. So, a couple of different things that communities, agencies, groups, whatever, can take this information and customize it for their use. And so, of course, what I've been thinking with plain language, what can we create along these lines? And they could be, HTML pages, they could be PDF reports, they could be white papers. I'm just, looking for some ideas about how we can get some information so that an agency who may or may not have had a long-standing plain language tradition can say, oh, I really need to start this in my agency. What can I do? What can I do to get this started? And, instead of having everyone have to make things up from the beginning, maybe we can share the knowledge. And so I was hoping to use things from different agencies and different groups. So obviously federal agencies are our focus, but there might be considerations from others that we could look at. So just to give you sort of another example of toolkits, a couple of years ago, I created one for my office because, I was trying to get people to focus on their web content. And I thought, okay, what are the questions that people have about web content who may not have had a lot of experience with it? What often happens, at least in my office, is I get an email saying, surprise, you've got a new web content creator, for this program, for this business line. And so, I can't make any assumptions about how experienced are they with content. Where are they on the spectrum of being, a beginner or a complete expert? And, sometimes when people answer those sorts of questions, they may be wrong. So I was trying to come up with how are things, what are the sorts of questions that they would have? So I said, these are core articles and instructions, so we can have productive discussions on how to best feature ITS content on GSA.gov. So this was a very specific area of content, but I wanted everyone coming from the same principles. So there's a style guide and checklist, which I think is wrong now, or at least outdated because we've redone it. But things like, as you can see, things from webcontent.gov, knowing your audience, how to categorize top tasks, how to focus, how to organize and categorize content, how to focus on top tasks. A lot of Jerry McGovern articles there. How do you write for the web? So that, when I came in to discuss, I had always hoped that people would have looked at these articles and known what I was talking about when I said, okay, when somebody comes to your page, what do they want to do? And for my division's pages, what they want to do is they either want to do market research or they want to order. Those are the two things that they want to do. And that is how our business line is devised. So that is, this was the kind of information that I wanted people to know before we started collaborating on some content. I did include some of the Jerry McGovern articles, very noted web author, how to move to self-service, how to make sure your content focuses on your customers and not just reflect your organization. Is the organization the enemy of the customer? Maybe I should reread that one. I think that was a really good one. How not to be organization-centric. This is all his whole thing, is how to make websites work for the users or the customers. Also, sometimes we talk about where to place information on a website, and having information about the F-shape pattern, which was very, very emphasized before mobile got as strong as it was. But, it's important to say, look, you can put things on the right, but no one's going to look at them. Know where people's eyes are going to be going. So this is information I wanted people to have before we even started talking about it. And then some Jakob Nielsen, scrolling, the about us information, writing style for print versus web, all these things. These are constant articles that I kept referring to, and whether people look at them or not is hard to enforce, but at least they knew where the resources were. Okay, so that's 2 examples of toolkits, and there are more. There are a lot more, but these are ones that I thought, okay, this gives an idea of what toolkits are and what people can use them for. And I'm hoping that they'll save time. People can find information. So I think that the toolkit is sort of a shortcut to important information, because you can't have web pages called important information, because, it should all be important. But a toolkit is, getting people able to do something. So there was another thing, we have our new website, which we're so proud of, plainlanguage.gov, brought to us by 18F, part of TTS here at GSA. And I got a first month of data, which we hadn't been able to get before. And so I was just looking at this because this is what I do in my day job. And I was saying, okay, what are people finding useful? And I was extraordinarily interested to find out that the checklist is got more page views than the homepage. That's very extraordinary. So obviously the checklist is going to be something we want to have in the toolkit. So that's the checklist. This is data-driven decisions. This is that. The guidelines, obviously, maybe writing tips. But notice how after these top 3, the traffic really drops. The page views really drop. And that is interesting. That's one of the reasons I'm so excited to be able to have access to this data. We see a couple of things are still popular, like the examples before and after, the law, but apparently what people are finding useful, and we can't depend entirely upon 1 month. But this is something we'll be checking every month to see, what are people using. So looks like the checklist. Let's take a look at that. Okay. It is exactly, yeah, see if your document meets plain language standards. And if you're writing for the web, here's the web checklist. But this is apparently, this is number 1 under groups and organizations. So, okay, write for the average reader, organized to serve the reader's needs. Okay, yeah, that is useful information because this moves people to information that they can use. So that's an interesting way to look at it. And remember, here's our new website, plainlanguage.gov, with the new breakdowns, the new clear open design, law and requirements, plain language guidelines, examples, training, resources. So, we have a couple of things to draw from. So I guess I'm wondering now what your ideas are about creating a toolkit, whether you have questions about toolkits themselves, or if you have ideas on what would be a good toolkit candidate for plainlanguage.gov. Do we have any questions, Janelle? No. Well, you know what that means? That means I get to keep talking. Well, let's look at what we can do. I was looking at this toolkit area and thinking, what would be the right thing to include? And obviously I'm going to put in this checklist, in this list of the meeting recommendations, checklist, see December 2017 analytics. So that, I had another question, which is the guidelines, a link to the guidelines, yes. Those are very important. What about the law? And this is a question I have for you. Is it important to look at the law, the Plain Writing Act of 2010? Is that going to be information that people are going to find useful to do something? I'm wondering about that. I'm not sure that that is going to get us that much further for that. I mean, it does link to the guidelines. It does link to OMB guidance. It does have some executive orders on regulations, or this page at least does. But I'm not entirely sure that this gets us, that the law is actually going to get us to, I'm not sure it needs to be in a toolkit. I'd be interested in hearing from other people whether that's the case or not. So I'm going to put a lot of question marks because I haven't actually decided against that or not. So what would people find useful? This is what people are finding useful right now. For example, the examples, which I'm going to bring up on here. Let's see. The before and after examples are always very popular. And let's say, wordiness made spare. What a wonderful phrase. Yes, yes, I can see how that would help if you're looking to do a one to another comparison on the same page to see what does this, like making bulleted lists, how does that work? That could be very useful. So I think probably the before and after section would help. Let's see. Okay, so somebody had a question. Yay. Have I lost them? No. Okay, we have some questions. This is fantastic. Thank you so much. We'll be copying and paste them from later. Is your toolkit available publicly? Looks like some great resources. We are hoping to develop a toolkit. This is why we're having this meeting, so we can say, hey, you know, that's a great idea, but I'd also like this. Or, you know, as I said earlier, the law. Does the law really help? Is this what you'd include in a toolkit? You know, I'm thinking no. Maybe someone has really good arguments to say, well, yeah, it really should be in. It really should be in the toolkit. So, you know, please let us know if you have any instructions. Okay, the law is important. It gives us the authority to do so. True, there's no enforcement, however, and I feel that, you know, with plain language, it's a lot of persuasion and education. Okay, so maybe the law could be worked up, helps people motivate their organization to take action and devote resources. Okay, where to get the law? Well, we'd certainly be linking to the law. I mean, toolkits are often checklists or groups of links rather than, you know, the information. Remember what we looked at earlier, the one from HHS? Just double checking on that, yeah. The promoting your guide. Here's what they have. They have a lot of documents. They have a lot of links here. Personally, I would like to see some groupings of what these things are. So maybe one group of templates and one group of, you know, strategic considerations or how-tos or things like that. So, you know, this could have subheadings and be a great deal more useful. And perhaps linking a little less, you know, when I'm not meaning to click. But okay, let's see what some of the questions are. Where to get the law? Okay, somebody says number 5, there's nothing other than a link to the law. There's nothing in it that has concrete items for a toolkit. That's sort of where I was thinking. Basic descriptions of plain concepts like active voice. Okay, so maybe a list of techniques with links to more information, probably in the guidelines. So, you know, I think it's a list of 9 techniques that we use, which is, you know, shorter sentence and paragraphs, active, not passive voice, using pronouns, things like that. So maybe including those techniques and then linking to that section in the guidelines. Yes, I think that could work really well. Okay, alternative word lists. Those are very popular. And very useful. I'm trying to see where that is in here. So use simple words and phrases. You know, what we can do is monitor this, monitor the analytics for a couple of months and say, oh, okay, these are consistently in the top 10. You know, these are things that people are obviously finding useful. So, you know, that's something. And this is the use simple words or phrases. You know, this to that. Yeah, so that could be very useful. Let me grab that. Simple words and phrase substitutions. There, okay. Thank you very much. That was a really good idea. The checklist seems to be its own toolkit. Yes, I was thinking that. It may need to be, this might be our techniques already. And so that's a good point to start with. Yeah, that's a good point. We'll have to consider that. I like that. Many of the people in the workshops use them. Very good. I like including the law. Okay, how it works with keeping in mind how it works with the laws on Section 508 and limited English proficiency. Okay, so it looks like we're running 50-50 on include the law, don't include the law. You know, if it's coming that close, I think that we'll probably go ahead and include it. Active voice, you know, we do have that from the checklist. Before and after is working. Appendices in the toolkit that have exercises. Okay, that's a really interesting point. Let's see, that would be something like we would need to develop, but that, there's nothing against that. Exercises, let's say, just say more, and we could look at what, maybe we could have a session where we came up with writing exercises, because I know that they're really good icebreakers for training sessions. And if you don't want to use that organization's examples, because sometimes people can get very, very sensitive about that. If you have ones that have sort of come up and you can make them less federal agency dependent, sometimes that works for a group that's, as I said, sensitive about their writing. Keep them coming. This is fantastic. Just exactly what I was hoping to make it help, to use this session for doing. Okay, big concepts, understand the message, to nitty gritty, to word choice. Yes, that's a really good point, because I always imagine the techniques, our list of 9 or so techniques, as starting with the hardest part, which is reader-centered organization, as I think of it. However, the simplest thing to start with is often the information design, because people are used to seeing that. And you can often say, I didn't change any of your words. Sometimes people find that very comforting. And you say, I just put them into a bulleted list, not just a regular paragraph. And people can see. I won't say that people have gone so far as to compare, the bulleted list to the original, but there are people who would do that. And it is very comforting to them to be able to say, oh, I see you did not change my words. You simply arranged them a little bit differently. And sometimes that can be, a huge opening to plain language, just in the sense of you're overwhelming the reader if you do it this way, but if you do it this way, they can take in what you're trying to say and not keep thinking, oh gosh, this is hard. Or, my favorite, ow, ow, ow. So, that can sometimes be a very effective thing to do. Starting with what I consider easy. Not that information design is easy, but using things like headers and tables and bulleted lists is an easier step for some people before you start editing. So, okay, breakdown of the different big the different big areas of plain language. That's a very good point. Exercises. Okay, so some excitement about exercises. I hope that excitement is reflected when we have a creation exercise of those. Is the resources section of the website a toolkit? Well, let's take a look. There's some things. There's groups and organizations where you can go for other training. There's checklists and handouts. That might be what we were talking about. A couple of different ones. We'll have to look. Handouts and posters, very interesting. Style guides, we have a number of different problems with style guides with plain language. They intersect, but a great deal less than many people think. Books and articles. I think that while all of these are good, for example, I'm not sure that I'd include humor and quotes in a toolkit. They can be useful, but again, I'm thinking of the toolkit as a shortcut to looking at all of this. Like, what's the bare minimum of what people could find useful? What do they have to know? If they have 15 minutes to read up on this, where could they go? Where could they go for this? But that's a good point. We certainly don't want to duplicate material. The toolkits look useful, but I find a long series of URLs are a little forbidding. I like to lead into each one with a little blurb, maybe 10 or 12 words, kind of a teaser or a mini sales pitch. Do you suppose people find this helpful enough to recommend it when people have time? So if I'm understanding you, the person who wrote the question, it's you don't necessarily want to see just the list of links. I'm thinking about that, and I think that here's where descriptive link language would really come into play, where you say, you know, what you're talking about. And I'm looking at the checklist right now where it says, where the words, instead of just a list of URLs, it's, excuse me, written for the average reader. That's the link language. It just occurred to me that perhaps you were looking at, let me see. I have too many tabs open. That's what always happens. I was thinking that maybe you were looking at the, were you referring to this Google document, this Google spreadsheet of the stats? That's just an analytics report. That's not something we'd be publishing in the toolkit, just in case there was a misunderstanding there. Resources like Strunk and White, Alan Alda's books, others, we're very interested in expanding what we have here. So that is not a problem. We'll be looking at refining some of the resources and adding some subcategories, but we're always happy. You know, we've had some very lively discussions on the listserv about what are useful books. And I remember that Alan Alda's latest was particularly good. And you know, some people always vote for Strunk and White. They found it very useful. So, you know, we just don't want to, and I'm sure everyone understands this, we can't, as federal employees, endorse some books over other books. So that's a little thing holding us back. But, you know, if we can find a way just to phrase it so that it doesn't come off like that, I'm happy to work on that. The A to Z plain language index. Wow, that sounds very interesting. Did I miss this somehow where it says, I like Miriam's section for a basic PP? Bravo. Okay, not entirely sure what that means. So I'm sure that that's just as I'm looking over these points fairly quickly. Splitting into sections, going back to motivating the organization and individuals to understand the goals. All right, I see. Yes, include PowerPoint files for a basic class that users can then fill out and make organization specific. Yes, that is an excellent notion. Would really like to be able to do that. I see what Janelle very nicely printed that or refreshed it so I could see. So yes, I can see why that would be very valuable, because who likes putting PowerPoints together? Nobody. So, okay, some marketing resources. Okay, going back, the whole list is going back to motivating the organization and individuals to understanding the goals, maybe some marketing resources to promote plain language like infographics, posters, etc. That would be really interesting. I have some posters and some tabletops that the GSA visuals team put together. And I, would be happy to check with them, but there's no reason they couldn't be downloaded by other people and printed out and used. That's, that would make everyone's life a lot easier. Also, there's things like plain language games. There's, what we're trying to do with the toolkit is create things so that we're not coming up with everything in isolation or by ourselves or relying on that. This is supposed to save people time and effort. If someone in one agency has created something that you can use, there's no reason not to share it. That's was our thinking with the toolkit. What can people find useful and use for their own agency? So some very good ideas. Train the trainer type things. Okay. How about some research on the value of plain language to understanding productivity, customer service? There's a lot of groups doing that. I think that we cover a lot of that on social media. There's a lot of research information in the Twitterverse, as it were, and I certainly retweet it, and I believe that it also gets retweeted from some of our volunteers when they're running the plainlanguage.gov Twitter account. Also, April Finnan recaps the social media every month. I'm sorry, every week, just to say, in case you missed it, in case you're not on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn or what have you, these are ways that you can keep up with some of the research. But yes, that is really helpful. That's what I was doing with this web toolkit from, gosh, a number of years ago. But it was really important, I thought, to have people have a basic understanding of certain things, so that when I, talked about the jam paradox, people didn't look at me as if I had lobsters crawling out of my ears. I was able to say, remember that study where the people were offering 27 kinds of jam and people just ran away? And when they offered fewer jams, more people bought, and they bought more. So the jam paradox. So that was some of the research reading that I was trying to pass on. Okay, these are some very, very good resources, and I've been trying to keep up in the toolkit draft as well as the questions, and it looks to me, at least right now, that we have the checklist as a toolkit idea, the guidelines, the law, and I will stand aside on that. Before and after, the list of techniques, that's most of the current the current resources list, I think, the simple words and phrase substitutions, and what we need to develop is exercises that people would find that really useful. So that's what I'm gathering from this. Although I'll have to take another look at this and compile it into the what to do element. But yeah, this sounds really good. Are there any questions from the room? Or are they all feeding into the same document? Yes. Are there any other things you'd like to suggest? Are there any things, you don't think I addressed enough? Is there anything that needs explaining? Well, if there's nothing more, I guess that we'll end the session. There's no point in keeping you all stuck here on the toolkit hangout if there's nothing more. But you all know my email, and we'll certainly share some of this information with the plain listserv, the questions, and then some of my comments from the document to see where we're going with this. So, and we'll have this recorded, this has been recorded, and we'll share it later on. So thank you so much for joining us today, and thanks for your help with the toolkit.